The shadow under my bed isn't mine anymore. I first noticed the change when I came home late and saw my shadow under the bed before I even turned the lights on, stretched long and still like it was waiting for me. When I stepped inside, my actual shadow lagged behind by a second, sliding into place slowly, like someone else was puppeteering it from underneath the floorboards. Each night, the delay grew longer, my shadow arriving later, its movements slightly off, like it was learning how I walked by copying me frame by frame. I bent down to look under the bed, half expecting dust, but the darkness there shifted, pulling back like it was exhaling, retreating into deeper places I couldn't reach. The next morning, the sunlight didn't help. My shadow didn't match the angle of the window anymore, bending left when the light came from the right. I walked around the room slowly and watched it jerk behind me, trying to catch up, as though it hated being seen in the wrong shape. My grandmother once told me shadows were tethers in old folklore, pieces of us left slightly ajar for things that wanted to slip through unnoticed. That night, when I moved, my shadow stayed still for a moment too long, lying flat and heavy under the bed, like it was thinking about something. When it finally rose to follow me, it moved in one clean ripple, like liquid adjusting itself, catching up with too much eagerness. I tried sleeping with the lamp on, but the bulb flickered and dimmed until the room was nothing but soft shapes and that dragging sound beneath the mattress. Something under there shifted its weight, slow and deliberate, like an animal settling closer, pressing against the underside of the bed frame. My shadow stretched across the wall, even though I wasn't standing anywhere near it, rising up like a tall, crooked figure trying to stand on unsteady legs. I whispered for it to stop, but the shadow on the wall tilted its head, mirroring a gesture I hadn't made. The mattress dipped slightly, the subtle sag of something crawling upward, inch by inch, as if trying to join me above the bed. The air thickened around my ankles, cold and heavy, like two hands were cupping them gently, testing the shape of my bones. I froze, listening to the faint dragging beneath the floorboards, slow rhythm, patient, almost methodical in its approach. When I finally dared to look at the wall, the shadow had split one part, mimicked me, and another lingered behind it, taller, broader, like it had grown a second body. The room tilted as if gravity shifted, and both shadows leaned toward me with the same unnatural stiffness dolls have when someone moves them too quickly. I backed toward the hallway, but my shadow stayed rooted in the room, stretched thin across the carpet, as though refusing to leave its new hiding place. The taller shadow bent down toward the thin one, and the thin one rippled like it was accepting instructions, learning something I wasn't meant to see. The dresser drawers rattled slightly, each one pulled open and closed by some invisible draft that felt intentional rather than random. I stepped into the kitchen for light, but my shadow didn't follow. Instead, something slid across the tile behind me with a soft, deliberate scrape. When I turned, the shadow under the doorway rose slowly, stretching upward until it matched my height exactly, then grew taller, as if reaching for a shape beyond me. It stepped toward me without feet, gliding, the edges of its form folding inward like fabric being twisted by unseen hands. A cold breath pressed against my cheek, but the room was dead still. No windows open, no breeze capable of moving any air. I backed away until my spine hit the counter, and the shadow leaned in, studying me like someone comparing a drawing to the real thing. The thing under the bed scraped again, louder this time, giving a slow, satisfied drag as though crawling toward the gap beneath the bedroom door. My shadow on the wall shivered, then separated completely, peeling itself away like skin shedding from a snake, leaving a faint smear on the paint. The loose shadow stepped toward the kitchen doorway, just as the thing beneath the bed began pushing its way into the hall, dark mass crawling low and patient. I realized with growing dread that both shapes were moving with perfect coordination, As if practicing a sequence they had been rehearsing for a very long time. The taller shadow leaned close enough that I felt its cold outline against my chest, like a second heartbeat syncing with mine. The crawling shape squeezed through the bedroom doorway, unfolding into a silhouette that didn't match any human form, but clearly wanted to learn how. Both shapes paused, waiting, as if expecting me to stand still, so they could finish whatever they had started practicing beneath my bed. I turned to run, but every light in the house flickered, casting multiple overlapping silhouettes across the walls. Each one wrong, each one eager, none of them mine. When the shadows finally rushed forward, they didn't move like darkness. They moved like hands reaching for a long-lost owner, convinced they had finally found the right body. The window paints faces I've never seen. The window in my living room started showing faint outlines at night, faces pressed against the glass. Not reflections, not neighbors, just strangers whose eyes never seemed to blink. I wiped the glass clean, thinking it was residue or moisture, but the shapes returned in sharper detail, like the window was remembering people I had never met. When the moon rose, the faces shifted in unison toward it, stretching upward as though they were waiting for something just outside my field of vision. I tried filming the glass, but the recording caught only static. My phone vibrated afterward with a notification saying the file was not permitted. One night, the faces were closer, as if their foreheads rested on the opposite side of the pane, and their breath left long streaks I couldn't wipe away. I pressed my own hand against the glass, thinking I'd feel cold, but the surface pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat answering mine. My neighbor claimed old houses sometimes trap memory, saying the window could be showing residual echoes. But these people looked aware, focused, hungry. The next night, one of the faces opened its mouth, and the glass warped inward, distorting like thin fabric instead of something solid. I heard something inside the walls, a low, dragging scrape, like fingers running silently along wooden beams, searching for soft places to push through. When I tried to sleep, my bedroom window showed a new face, this one smiling with too many teeth, as though proud it had found me again. I left the lamp on, but the light didn't bother them. In fact, the faces leaned closer, illuminated, features sharpening like the window wanted me to study them. I tried calling a friend to stay over, but the call cut out when I mentioned the faces, replaced by faint breathing and a whisper of my name. By morning, the windows were empty again, but faint handprints clung to the inside surface, streaking downward like someone had slid slowly out of sight. Midday sunlight didn't help. In the corner of the glass, I noticed a faint outline forming even though the sun was brightest and strongest. I draped blankets over the windows, but they puffed inward slightly, the way curtains billow when someone walks past them on the other side. That night, I felt a tap on my shoulder, but no one was behind me. The window's fabric-like distortion rippled softly, like something brushing against it. The smile in the glass widened, stretching beyond natural proportions, cheekbones rising as though the face was learning new ways to express delight. The tapping came again, this time on the far wall, then the hallway, then both windows at once, each pulse synchronized like a slow countdown. I realized they were mapping the house, charting every entry point, searching for the weakest place where glass or wood might finally give way. I pushed a heavy dresser against the main window, but the faces pressed forward harder, features flattening like they were testing the strength of both glass and furniture. I turned off all the lights to see if darkness would drive them away, but instead, dozens of new silhouettes appeared, as though darkness was their invitation. The window surface rippled outward, stretching farther than before, and the face closest to me whispered something I felt rather than heard. I backed away slowly, but the hallway mirror showed a reflection of the living room, and in the reflection, the faces were already inside the house. The mirror cracked down the center, a clean, straight line that separated my reflection from the version of me standing inside the window's world. The air in the room thickened, warm and damp, carrying the faint metallic smell of breath from too many mouths hovering near thin barriers. I tried to flee out the back door, but the doorframe bowed inward slightly, wood bending like someone was pushing from the other side. Every window in the house began to vibrate, humming in unison, their surfaces bulging as though expanding lungs were pressing from inside the walls. I shouted at them to stop, but the words came out warped, the sound swallowed by the glass and echoed back in a distorted version of my own voice. The faces all turned toward me at once, synchronizing in perfect, unnatural alignment, eyes wide, teeth bared, waiting for a signal I couldn't hear. When the signal came, it wasn't sound. It was a sudden cold wind passing through the living room, and with it, the glass finally thinned like water. I ran outside, expecting safety, but every window on the block held the same faces now, all of them watching me, all of them smiling like they'd finally found the right person. I realized with sick certainty that the windows hadn't been showing who was outside. They'd been showing who was coming. The window that shows what doesn't exist. I first noticed it at 2:13, and the window across from my bed reflected a room that wasn't mine. Dimly lit, corners bending in ways impossible for architecture. A figure crouched in the mirrored room, wearing a fox mask, limbs bending unnaturally, staring directly at me despite the distance. I blinked. It was gone. But the window still showed impossible shapes, moving subtly in the corners, stretching, folding, overlapping themselves. The next night, I saw more. Small pairs of masked figures climbing the walls, sliding along ceilings, crouched in impossible physics, observing silently. When I moved, they mirrored me perfectly, tilting, bending, copying my breathing and small hesitations, as if rehearsing a ritual around me. The reflections sometimes lagged, showing movements I hadn't made, yet one of them smiling slightly, head cocked, as if anticipating my next thought. I tried closing the blinds. The silhouettes appeared behind the fabric, bending through it, staring, whispering in clicks that vibrated through the glass. I dared touch the window. My hand sank slightly into the pane, as though it were soft, like liquid, and the masked figure pressed back, mimicking my grip. The air around the window smelled faintly of wet clay and burned wood, thick, tactile, unnerving in ways my mind couldn't rationalize. I stepped back, and the room inside the reflection began to grow, stretching, elongating, multiple rooms folding into one, corners connecting that shouldn't possibly exist. I watched as one fox-masked figure slowly crouched, elongated its limbs, crawling up the walls, sliding along the ceiling, perfectly mirrored in its own reflection. I reached for my phone. The reflection didn't match. The figure inside was closer than I was, grinning faintly, tilting its head impossibly to follow me. The blinds rattled. Shadows began emerging around my room, subtle, impossible, stretching across surfaces at angles my eyes couldn't track. I tried leaving the room. The door led back into the same reflection-filled room, corridors folding, ceilings leaning, floorboards bending like liquid under my feet. The window became a portal of whispers, clicking tones, faint high-pitched hums I could feel in my chest, all perfectly synchronized with my heartbeat. I crouched near the window. A small figure climbed along the sill, stretched impossibly, pressing its elongated fingers against the glass, tilting its masked head as if questioning me. I gasped. Dozens of tiny masked figures emerged in the reflection, mirrored in corners of the room I couldn't see, multiplying like impossible shadows. I moved backward. The window's reflection bent, stretched, showing rooms I had never been in. Floors rising and falling, ceilings tilting, impossible gravity acting selectively. I realized each reflection moved independently. Obeying no rules, it mirrored me in subtle, eerie ways that made me doubt my own memory. A whisper tickled my ear. "You see us, we see you." My reflection nodded slightly before I did, smiling faintly, tilting its head like a predator observing. The next day, I measured the window. It was smaller than I remembered. Yet at night, it stretched impossibly, widening, growing taller, bending toward me like a living thing. I touched the glass. The reflection's hand pressed back harder than physics allowed. Warm, soft, slightly sticky, as if it wanted me inside. The fox-masked figure crouched closer, elongated limbs wrapping subtly around corners of the room I couldn't see, tilting toward me slowly, deliberately. I tried leaving the room. All doors led back here, to this impossible mirrored space, reflections multiplying, bending, observing silently, perfectly synchronized. I realized it wasn't just a window, it was learning me, anticipating me, mapping me, shaping the reflection world according to my fears, my habits, my heartbeat. A shadow emerged from the ceiling, bending downward, elongated, stretching across the room, connecting with reflections that had no physical counterpart in my reality. I dared not blink. Every shadow, every reflection, every bend in the room was alive, observing, marking my movements, recording my smallest gestures. The final glimpse. Dozens of tiny figures crouched in impossible angles. Reflections in reflections, tilting, observing, waiting, whispering faintly. We'll be patient. We'll be perfect. I sat down, chest tight, hands trembling. The window pulsed faintly, stretching again, showing rooms that didn't exist, figures that weren't human, and a world I could never escape. The shadows that waited in my apartment. The first night, I noticed a subtle pressure in the air, like someone standing just behind the wall, shaping the silence around me. The apartment felt smaller immediately. A floorboard creaked softly in the hallway, deliberate, slow. I froze, staring at the dark corner by the door, where shadows pooled unnaturally, stretching toward me. I saw nothing when I turned on the lights, but the edges of the room rippled as if fabric in the walls shifted, hiding something patient. The curtains quivered without wind, brushing against the floor. For a moment, they formed vague shapes, limbs folding and unfolding in the half-light, like waiting human forms. A soft tap came from the balcony window. I swore it came from just beyond the glass, fingertips tracing the cold surface, marking it with invisible patterns. I backed toward the bedroom, heartbeat in my ears. The air grew thick, scented faintly with damp rubber and dust. Something was moving deliberately across the floor. The doorknob of the hallway clicked twice. Not enough to turn, just enough to announce presence. I could feel it press lightly, testing how much weight it could bear. The floorboards shifted near the kitchen. A shadow glided across the wall, tall and featureless, its head tilting unnaturally, scanning me as if memorizing my shape. A second shadow appeared behind the first, crouched low, limbs bent at impossible angles. Both stood silently, waiting, exhaling air I couldn't feel, but that chilled the room. I backed against the bedroom wall. The first shadow raised a hand, long and narrow, fingers brushing the carpet slowly, shaping pressure that pressed into my feet. The balcony curtains shifted again, revealing a faceless figure outside, its posture perfect, watching silently. Light reflected off its mask, revealing subtle imperfections, as though handcrafted to unsettle. Soft scratches came from the ceiling. Something crawled across the beams above me, careful, deliberate, moving toward a spot where it could observe without being seen. The shadows in the hallway shifted closer, stretching, almost walking along walls in ways that defied human movement. I could feel them watching every twitch of my body. A faint scraping sound traced along the baseboard. Something long and thin slipped against the wall, brushing against furniture as if marking territory, unseen but present. The balcony figure pressed closer, peeking through the curtain slit. Its presence bent the fabric unnaturally, casting shadows that formed shapes vaguely human, but wrong, elongated, impossible. I tried to close my eyes. The pressure in the room intensified, like fingers pressing lightly against my temples, molding the air around me, tracing the edges of my fear. The shadows outside the door leaned forward slightly, tilting, adjusting, synchronized. Their weight pressed into the apartment through the door, as if the wood were transparent to them. The ceiling scraping moved toward the bedroom door. I could hear slow, deliberate breaths, wet and soft, filling the thin spaces in the air where sound shouldn't exist. The shadow by the hallway pressed a hand against the wall, leaving a faint smudge. Its mask reflected dim light, featureless yet somehow knowing, observing every inch of the room. The balcony figure pushed through the curtain an inch, stretching impossibly to peer inside. I could see the hollow shape of its mask pressing against fabric, bending reality subtly. I froze as a tiny click sounded behind the bed. Something slid along the floor beneath it, moving closer, brushing my shoes lightly with inhuman patience. The shadows at the door adjusted again. They moved with precision, tilting heads, stretching limbs. Even the air seemed to bend around them as they studied me. The balcony curtains quivered violently. I swore I saw two more figures step onto the railing outside, masks pale and blank, watching the interior as if rehearsing entry. A subtle scrape came from the kitchen. Long fingers traced the counter edge, moving slowly, brushing items without toppling anything, mapping the space, learning the room's dimensions. I held my breath. The shadows outside shifted slightly, coordinating movement. Something was aligning, preparing, waiting for a cue. I didn't understand. The scraping from the ceiling stopped. Silence fell, thick, oppressive. I could hear my own heartbeat in the room, loud against the absence of sound. Then the balcony curtains pulled slightly inward again. A figure outside leaned down to peer closer, mask pressing through, reflecting the room back at me in distorted form. The two shadows by the door moved closer, tilting as they approached without sound. I could feel pressure through the wood, faint but firm, like a gentle hand against a chest. A low, rhythmic tap came from the window behind me. 3 times, slow, steady. Each tap echoed, marking seconds I wished didn't exist. The shadows at the door adjusted one final time, synchronized perfectly, tilting toward the apartment. Their hands pressed against the wood lightly, a whispering of movement I couldn't see. The balcony figure withdrew slightly, disappearing from view, but I could sense it lingering, waiting, patient, like something that knew I'd remain awake until morning. The ceiling gave one final creak, a long, slow exhale through the beams. The apartment held its breath as the pressure of unseen bodies remained, quietly testing my resolve. When daylight arrived, the shadows were gone. The apartment felt empty, but the air remained thick, carrying the memory of presence, a warning that the quiet things never really leave.